The gunshot echoed through the valley like a death knell, silencing the songbirds that had been greeting the dawn. Abigail Ellis clutched the letter in her trembling hands, the paper worn from countless readings, as she watched the lone rider approach her homestead. She'd been waiting 3 days for news of her brother Thomas, who'd been falsely accused of stealing cattle from the Blackwell ranch. 3 days of pacing and praying had led to this moment, and the grim expression on Sheriff Parker's face told her everything before he even dismounted. Colorado Territory, 1873. The promise of new beginnings had drawn the Ellis siblings west after losing their parents, but the lawless frontier had other plans. Abigail, 22 and fiercely independent, had kept their small cattle ranch running while Thomas handled business in town. Now, as Sheriff Parker removed his hat and cleared his throat, that world was crumbling. "Miss Ellis, I'm afraid I've got bad news," he said, his voice heavy with regret. "There was an incident in town. Your brother." "Is he hurt?" Abigail asked, stepping forward, her blue calico dress billowing in the morning breeze. The sheriff's eyes dropped to the ground. "I'm sorry, Miss Ellis. The Blackwell boys claimed he drew on them first. By the time I got there," he hesitated, "they'd already taken him away." "Taken him? What do you mean, taken him?" Panic rose in Abigail's throat. "I mean they took his body, Miss Ellis. Said they'd handle the burial since it happened on their property." Sheriff Parker shifted uncomfortably. Judge Wilson ruled it self-defense. Abigail's knees buckled and she grabbed the porch railing to steady herself. "Self-defense? Thomas never carried a gun. He wouldn't hurt anyone." Her voice cracked. "They murdered him and stole his body. Where's the justice in that?" Sheriff Parker replaced his hat. "I'm truly sorry, Miss Ellis. The Blackwells run this county. Even I can only do so much against them." As the sheriff rode away, Abigail sank to the porch steps, the letter from Thomas falling from her grasp. His last written words stared up at her from the dust. "Don't worry, Abby. I'll clear this up and be home by sundown." She didn't notice the second rider approaching until he was nearly at her gate. Tall and lean, with sun-weathered skin and eyes that had seen too much of the world's harshness, he dismounted with the easy grace of a man who'd spent most of his life on horseback. His clothes were dusty from travel, but the gun at his hip was well maintained, and the badge pinned to his vest caught the morning light. "Miss Ellis?" His voice was quiet but carried across the yard. "My name's Lucas Zimmerman, U.S. Marshal." He removed his hat, revealing dark hair that curled slightly at the nape of his neck. "I'm investigating the Blackwell operation. Your brother was helping me." Abigail stared at him, her grief momentarily forgotten. "Thomas was working with a marshal?" Lucas nodded, approaching slowly. He had evidence of their rustling operation, information that could have brought down the whole Blackwell empire. He glanced toward town. "That's why they killed him." "They took his body," Abigail said, her voice hollow. "They won't even let me bury my own brother." Lucas Zimmerman's jaw tightened, his eyes darkening with resolve. "Then I'll bring back his honor," he whispered, the promise carrying on the wind. "And his body, too. You have my word, Miss Ellis." "Why should I trust you?" Abigail challenged, rising to her feet. "I don't even know you." "Because I was supposed to meet Thomas in town 3 days ago. I was delayed by a washout on the trail." His voice roughened with regret. "If I'd been on time, your brother might still be alive." Abigail studied the marshal's face, searching for deception but finding only determination and guilt. "The Blackwells have half the county in their pocket. How do you plan to stand against them alone?" "I'm not alone." Lucas met her gaze. "I have evidence, and now I have a witness you." "Me?" Abigail shook her head. "I wasn't there when they killed Thomas." "But you know your brother. You know he wasn't a thief or a gunman. That testimony matters." Lucas stepped closer. "Help me finish what Thomas started, Miss Ellis." Abigail glanced at the small ranch house she and Thomas had built together. Her brother's tools still sat on the workbench where he'd left them, waiting for his return. "What would you need me to do?" "First, we need to recover your brother's remains. Every man deserves a proper burial." Lucas's eyes softened. "Then we gather evidence and witnesses. Build a case the judge can't ignore. And if the judge is in their pocket too, then we go higher. Territorial governor if necessary." Lucas set his jaw. "I've spent 3 years tracking the Blackwell's operation across 2 territories. Your brother was the first person brave enough to help me. I won't let his sacrifice be in vain." Abigail straightened her shoulders, wiping away her tears. "When do we start?" "Right now. Pack what you need. It's not safe for you here alone." As Abigail gathered her essentials, Lucas checked his ammunition and surveyed the property. The Blackwell Ranch sprawled across the valley to the east, its borders expanding each year as smaller ranchers were driven out or disappeared. Within the hour, they rode away from the Ellis homestead, Abigail on her mare, and Lucas leading the way on his stallion. She didn't look back at the only home she'd known for the past 3 years. There would be time for sentiment later, after she'd buried her brother and seen justice done. They rode in silence for miles, skirting the main road to avoid being seen. Lucas led them through a maze of canyons and dry creek beds, clearly familiar with the territory despite being an outsider. "How did you meet Thomas?" Abigail finally asked, as they paused to water their horses at a hidden spring. Lucas loosened his horse's saddle straps. "At the saloon in Silver Creek. I was gathering information, and he overheard something that caught his attention. When the Blackwell boys left, he approached me, said he'd seen their men changing brands on cattle that weren't theirs." "That doesn't sound like Thomas. He usually minded his own business." "Said they'd threatened a widow who refused to sell her land. Mrs. Johnson, I believe." Abigail nodded. "Martha Johnson. She has the farm north of ours. Thomas helped her with repairs after her husband passed. He couldn't stand by and watch them bully her." Lucas filled his canteen. "That's when I told him what I was investigating. The Blackwells aren't just rustlers. They're running guns to renegade bands stirring up trouble with the local tribes, creating chaos they can profit from." "And Thomas agreed to help you gather evidence?" "He did. Said he knew their routines, could track their movements without raising suspicion." Lucas's expression darkened. "I should have known they'd be watching him." Abigail tightened her horse's cinch. "You couldn't have known. Neither could he." As evening approached, they made camp in a sheltered canyon. Lucas built a small fire, careful to keep it low and hidden from distant eyes. Abigail watched him work, noting the efficiency of his movements and the constant vigilance in his posture. "You've been a marshal long?" she asked as he handed her a tin cup of coffee. 5 years. Served in the war before that." He settled across from her, the firelight casting shadows across his face. "Lost my family to raiders in Kansas. Decided to wear the badge so others wouldn't suffer the same." "I'm sorry." Lucas nodded acknowledgement. "What about you? How did you and Thomas end up here?" "Our parents died of fever in '69. We sold the farm in Missouri and came west." Abigail stared into her cup. "Thomas always dreamed of having his own ranch, said the West was where a man could make something of himself." "It still can be," Lucas said quietly, "once men like the Blackwells are brought to justice." "How many are there?" "Blackwells. I mean, 3 brothers, Victor, Edmund, and Frank. Victor's the oldest, the brains. Edmund handles their legitimate business dealings." "Frank?" Lucas's expression hardened. "Frank's the one you watch out for. Enjoys causing pain." "And they have men working for them?" "About 20 hired guns, plus the ranch hands who don't ask questions." Lucas sipped his coffee. "Sheriff Parker's not on their payroll, but he's afraid of them. Judge Wilson, however, is deeply in their pocket." Abigail wrapped her shawl tighter around her shoulders as the night air cooled. "How do we fight that kind of power?" by being smarter, and by finding your brother's body first. Once we have him properly buried, we'll go after the evidence he was gathering. What evidence? Ledgers, records of their illegal sales, names of their contacts. Lucas set down his cup. Thomas said he knew where they kept their records. Abigail fell silent, thinking of her brother's careful handwriting, how meticulously he'd kept their own ranch accounts. Of course he would notice discrepancies in the Blackwell's operations. Of course he would want to help. Get some sleep, Lucas said gently. I'll take first watch. Abigail nodded, unrolling her bedroll near the fire. Despite her exhaustion, sleep evaded her as images of Thomas played through her mind. His laughter, his steady presence, his absence now, a hole in her world that could never be filled. Across the fire, Lucas kept vigil, his silhouette a stark outline against the star-filled sky. A stranger who'd made her a promise. Her only hope for justice in a land where justice was often determined by who had the most guns or the deepest pockets. Dawn broke with a chorus of coyotes in the distance. Abigail woke to find Lucas already saddling the horses. They ate a cold breakfast of jerky and hardtack before continuing their journey. The Blackwell Ranch is about 5 miles east, Lucas explained as they rode. Their property backs up to the mountains. If they buried Thomas, it would be somewhere isolated, away from prying eyes. How do we find him? I have a contact, one of their former ranch hands who left after witnessing their cruelty. He might know where they dispose of their problems. They rode through the morning, keeping to the shadows of canyons and forests. By midday, they reached a small cabin nestled in a grove of pines. Smoke curled from the chimney, but no other signs of life were visible. Lucas signaled for Abigail to wait as he approached cautiously, his hand near his gun. He knocked a specific pattern on the door, 3 quick taps, pause, 2 more. The door cracked open and a weathered face peered out. Zimmerman, didn't expect to see you again so soon. Need your help, Jenkins, it's urgent. The man glanced at Abigail, then back to Lucas. Come on in then, quickly. Inside, the cabin was sparse but clean. A pot of stew bubbled on the stove, filling the single room with savory aromas. Jenkins, a man in his 50s with a limp and hard-worn hands, gestured for them to sit at the rough-hewn table. This about Ellis? He asked bluntly. Lucas nodded. You heard? Word travels. They're saying he tried to rob the Blackwell payroll, drew on Frank and got himself killed. Jenkins shook his head. Load of horse manure, if you ask me. Ellis wasn't the type. He was helping me investigate them, Lucas confirmed. They took his body. We need to find him. Give him a proper burial. Jenkins rubbed his beard. They got a place up in the North Pasture. Old silver mine that played out years ago. That's where Frank takes care of problems. Abigail leaned forward. You think that's where they took my brother? If Frank handled it, yes, madam. Jenkins's eyes softened with sympathy. I'm sorry about your loss. Your brother was a good man. Can you guide us there? Lucas asked. Jenkins hesitated. I can draw you a map. But if I show my face anywhere near Blackwell land, I won't live to see sundown. While Jenkins sketched a crude map on a piece of butcher paper, he explained the patrol patterns of the Blackwell men. They change guards at dusk and dawn. Between midnight and the early morning hours, they're at their lightest. That's when we'll go in, Lucas decided, studying the map. Jenkins provided them with food and offered his cabin for rest, but Lucas was wary of staying in one place too long. They left by mid-afternoon, heading toward the foothills where they could observe the Blackwell Ranch from a distance. As the sun began to set, they established a hidden position among the rocks, overlooking the sprawling ranch complex. The main house stood proudly on a hill, surrounded by barns, bunkhouses, and corrals. Men moved about the property, and smoke rose from several chimneys. Hard to believe so much evil operates in plain sight, Abigail murmured. Evil often wears a respectable face, Lucas replied, lowering his spyglass. Makes it harder to fight. They watched as lamps were lit across the property, pinpricks of light in the gathering darkness. Lucas pointed to the northern edge of the ranch, where the land rose toward the mountains. The mine should be up there, according to Jenkins's map. We'll wait until midnight, then make our approach. As darkness fully claimed the land, Abigail huddled closer to Lucas for warmth. The night had turned cold, and neither dared light a fire that might give away their position. "Tell me about him," Lucas said softly. "Your brother." Abigail smiled despite her grief. "Thomas was the kindest man you'd ever meet. Never raised his voice, never complained about hard work." She wrapped her arms around her knees. "After our parents died, he could have gone his own way, but he insisted we stay together. Said family was all that mattered." "Sounds like a good man." "He was." Abigail wiped away a tear. "He loved this land. Said it was wild but honest. That a person could see their true reflection out here, away from civilization's pretensions." "He was right about that." They fell silent, watching the ranch below as activities slowed and lights began to wink out. Midnight approached with agonizing slowness, but finally, Lucas nodded that it was time to move. They left their horses secured in a hidden gully and proceeded on foot, following Jenkins's map toward the abandoned mine. The journey was treacherous, and the dark, loose rocks threatened to send them sliding down the slope, and thorny brush tore at their clothing. But they moved steadily upward, pausing frequently to listen for patrols. "There," Lucas whispered, pointing to a dark opening in the hillside, barely visible in the moonlight. "That must be it." They approached cautiously, Lucas with his gun drawn. The mine entrance was partially collapsed, but a narrow path remained clear. Fresh boot prints in the dirt confirmed that someone had been there recently. Lucas produced a small lantern from his pack and lit it, keeping the flame low. "Stay behind me," he instructed as they entered the mine. The air inside was stale and heavy with the scent of damp earth. Their footsteps echoed softly off the stone walls as they ventured deeper. The tunnel extended about 30 feet before opening into a larger chamber where mining equipment had been abandoned years ago. And there, in the corner, was a freshly disturbed patch of earth. Abigail's breath caught in her throat. Lucas handed her the lantern and moved to the site, pulling a collapsible shovel from his pack. Without a word, he began to dig. The work was slow and grueling in the confined space. Abigail held the light steady, fighting back tears as each shovelful of dirt brought them closer to confirming their fears. After what seemed like hours, Lucas's shovel struck something solid. He set the tool aside and dropped to his knees, clearing the remaining dirt with his hands. A simple wooden box emerged, a makeshift coffin hastily constructed. "Abigail," Lucas said gently, "you don't have to look." "Yes, I do." She knelt beside him, setting the lantern on a nearby rock. "He's my brother." Together, they lifted the lid of the box. Thomas Ellis lay inside, his face peaceful despite the violence that had ended his life. Someone had placed his hands across his chest, but they hadn't bothered to clean the blood from his shirt, evidence of multiple gunshot wounds that told their own story about how he'd died. "They shot him in the back," Abigail whispered, touching her brother's cold cheek. "Cowards." Lucas examined the body carefully. 3 shots, all from behind. This wasn't a fair fight or self-defense. He pointed to Thomas's empty holster. And he wasn't carrying a gun. They planted one on him afterward. Abigail smoothed her brother's hair. "We need to take him home. He deserves to rest on his own land." Lucas nodded. "We will. But first, I need evidence of what they did." He produced a small notepad and pencil, sketching Thomas's wounds and making notes about the scene. From his pocket, he removed a small camera, a new Kodak that had become a valuable tool for marshals documenting crimes. "Stand back," he instructed, preparing the flash powder. The bright flare illuminated the chamber momentarily, capturing the evidence they needed. They were preparing to lift Thomas's coffin when a sound from the mine entrance froze them in place, the scrape of boots on stone. Lucas extinguished the lantern immediately and drew his gun, pulling Abigail behind a pile of mining equipment. They held their breath as the beam of another lantern swept into the chamber. "I'm telling you, I heard something," a gruff voice said. "Light from inside." "Probably just animals," another replied. "No one knows about this place except us." Two men entered the chamber, their lantern illuminating the open grave and coffin. They cursed in surprise. "Someone's been here. Check the body, make sure it's still there." As the men approached the coffin, Lucas stepped out from their hiding place, his gun aimed steadily. "U.S. Marshal, don't move." The men spun around, reaching for their weapons. Lucas fired once, hitting the taller man in the shoulder. He dropped with a howl of pain. The second man got a shot off that ricocheted off the rock wall before Lucas's second bullet found his leg. "Like I said, don't move." Lucas kept his gun trained on them as Abigail emerged from hiding. "Miss Ellis, if you'd be so kind as to relieve these gentlemen of their weapons." Abigail collected their guns while Lucas bound their wounds with strips torn from their own shirts. "You're on Blackwell land, Marshal," the wounded shoulder man snarled. "You won't leave here alive." "That a fact?" Lucas tied the man's hands behind his back. "Because from where I'm standing, you boys just confirmed your involvement in covering up a murder. That's a hanging offense. We didn't kill nobody. We just handled the burial." "After Frank Blackwell shot an unarmed man in the back? That makes you accessories." Lucas secured the second man. "Now, who else was involved in Thomas Ellis's murder?" The men exchanged glances but remained silent. "Fine. We'll do this the hard way." Lucas checked their bonds one last time. "Miss Ellis, we need to move quickly. These two were probably expected to report back." Together, they lifted Thomas's coffin and made their difficult way out of the mine. The weight was considerable, and the narrow tunnel made progress slow, but determination drove them forward. Outside, they fashioned a travois from branches and the rope Lucas carried, creating a makeshift sled they could attach to one of their horses. By the time they returned to their mounts and secured Thomas's coffin to the travois, dawn was breaking over the mountains. They had to move fast once the Blackwell men were missed. The entire ranch would be searching for them. "We can't go back to your homestead," Lucas said as they mounted up. "They'll look there first. We need somewhere safe to take your brother." "Martha Johnson?" Abigail suggested. "Her farm has a root cellar where we could hide him until we can arrange a proper burial." Lucas nodded. "We'll head there, but we need to be careful. The Blackwells will have men watching all the roads." They took a circuitous route, following game trails and dry creek beds to avoid the main roads. The travois slowed their progress, forcing them to move at a walk. By midday, the heat had become oppressive, and both humans and horses were exhausted. As they paused in the shade of a cottonwood grove to rest, the distant sound of hoofbeats sent Lucas reaching for his rifle. "Stay with your brother," he instructed Abigail, moving to a vantage point where he could see the approaching riders. 4 men on horseback were following their trail, still some distance away, but closing fast. Their dust cloud rose against the blue sky like a warning. "Blackwell men," Lucas confirmed, returning to Abigail. "We need to move now." They remounted quickly, urging their tired horses forward. The travois bounced over the rough terrain, but there was no time for gentleness. Their pursuers had spotted them and were gaining ground rapidly. "There's an arroyo ahead," Lucas called. "If we can reach it, we might be able to hold them off." They pushed their mounts harder, reaching the steep-sided wash just as the first shots rang out. Sliding down into the natural trench, they positioned themselves behind an outcropping of rocks. Lucas helped Abigail pull the travois down after them, ensuring Thomas's coffin was protected. "Stay down," Lucas warned, checking his ammunition. "I've got 8 shots in the rifle, 12 in my revolver." The Blackwell men approached cautiously, spreading out along the rim of the arroyo. One called down, "Give it up, Marshal. Hand over the girl and the body, and we might let you ride out of here." U.S. Marshal Zimmerman, you men are interfering with a federal investigation, Lucas shouted back. Throw down your weapons and surrender. Their answer was a volley of gunfire that sent chips of stone flying around Lucas and Abigail. Lucas returned fire, his shots more measured and precise. One of the Blackwell men tumbled down the slope, clutching his chest. The exchange continued for several minutes, neither side gaining advantage. Abigail remained beside Thomas's coffin, her brother's revolver in her hands, watching the rim of the arroyo for anyone trying to flank their position. We're pinned down, Lucas muttered, ejecting a spent cartridge. They'll eventually circle around behind us. What do we do? Abigail asked, her voice steady despite her fear. Before Lucas could answer, new gunfire erupted, not directed at them, but at the Blackwell men. Shouts of surprise rang out above them, followed by the sound of retreating horses. Marshal Zimmerman, you down there? A familiar voice called. Jenkins? Lucas stood cautiously, keeping his rifle ready. The old ranch hand appeared at the edge of the arroyo, accompanied by 3 men Abigail didn't recognize. Thought you might need some help. These are friends ranchers who've lost cattle to the Blackwells over the years. Relief washed over Lucas's face. Your timing couldn't be better. With Jenkins and his friends providing cover, they managed to get Thomas's coffin and their horses back up onto level ground. One of the Blackwell men lay dead. The others had retreated toward the ranch. They'll be back with reinforcements, Jenkins warned. We need to move quick. We're heading to Martha Johnson's place, Abigail explained. It's not far. Jenkins nodded. We'll escort you. Safety in numbers. Their expanded group made better time, the additional guns providing security as they traveled. By late afternoon, they reached the Johnson farm, a modest property with fields of corn and wheat surrounding a whitewashed farmhouse. Martha Johnson, a sturdy woman in her 40s with silver-streaked hair, was visibly shocked when they explained the situation, but she didn't hesitate to offer her help. Thomas was a good neighbor. Helped me when no one else would. Her eyes hardened. The Blackwells threatened to burn me out last spring when I wouldn't sell. If it weren't for Thomas standing up for me... She shook her head. Bring him in. My root cellar is cool and dry. He can rest there until we can arrange a proper burial. They carefully transferred Thomas's coffin to the root cellar, where Martha had cleared a space and laid out clean linens. Abigail remained with her brother while Lucas, Jenkins, and the other men discussed their next steps. The Blackwells will be looking everywhere for us, Lucas explained, spreading a map on Martha's kitchen table. We need to get our evidence to the territorial governor in Denver, but that's a 3-day ride. What about Judge Wilson? One of the ranchers asked. In their pocket. We need to go over his head. Martha set a pot of coffee on the table. You won't make it to Denver with the Blackwells hunting you. They control too much territory between here and there. What if we split up? Jenkins suggested. Create a diversion to draw them away while the Marshal and Miss Ellis head for Denver? Lucas considered this. It could work, but I don't want to put anyone else at risk. We're already at risk, Martha said firmly. Have been since the Blackwells set their sights on our land. It's time someone stood up to them. They spent the evening planning their strategy. 2 of Jenkins's friends would ride east in the morning, making no effort to hide their tracks, drawing the Blackwell men away. Meanwhile, Lucas, Abigail, Jenkins, and the 3rd rancher would escort Thomas's coffin to the small church in Silver Creek, where the pastor had agreed to hold a secret burial. After the burial, Miss Ellis and I will head for Denver with the evidence, Lucas concluded. Jenkins, you and the others lie low until you hear from us. What about my ranch? Abigail asked suddenly. Everything Thomas and I worked for. Martha squeezed her hand. My son will look after your place. He's been helping me since his father passed. Your cattle will be fine. Abigail nodded gratefully. The practical matters of livestock and property seemed both trivial and overwhelming in the face of her grief. But the thought of losing their ranch to neglect while seeking justice for Thomas was another burden she couldn't bear. That night, Abigail sat vigil beside her brother's coffin in the cool, quiet root cellar. Lucas joined her after midnight, silently offering his presence as comfort. "I never thanked you," Abigail said after a long silence, "for helping me find him, for risking your life." "No thanks needed. It's my duty." Lucas settled beside her on the rough wooden bench. "And my responsibility. If I'd been more careful about approaching Thomas, the Blackwells would have found another excuse." Abigail looked at the simple coffin. "They wanted our land. Thomas refused to sell. That's what this was really about." Lucas nodded. "Land, power, control. That's their currency. Your brother threatened all three by helping me. When this is over," Abigail said softly, "I'm going to rebuild. Make our ranch everything Thomas dreamed it could be. That would honor him more than any monument." "I believe you will." Lucas's voice held admiration. "You have your brother's strength." In the dim light of the single lantern, their eyes met. Something unspoken passed between them. Recognition of a kindred spirit, perhaps. Both driven by a sense of justice, both willing to fight for what was right. Dawn brought a flurry of activity as they prepared to move. The two ranchers who would serve as decoys departed first, heading east with obvious tracks. Jenkins reported Blackwell riders already patrolling the area, searching for any sign of them. They waited until mid-morning before carefully transferring Thomas's coffin to a wagon Martha had prepared, concealed under a load of hay. Abigail and Lucas rode alongside, while Jenkins and the third rancher, a man named Cooper, scouted ahead to ensure the road was clear. The journey to Silver Creek was tense, each rider scanning the horizon for dust clouds that might indicate pursuers. They avoided the main road, instead following the river that gave the town its name. By early afternoon, the church steeple came into view, a simple white spire rising above the cottonwoods. Pastor Miller was waiting, having been alerted by Jenkins earlier. The small cemetery behind the church was empty, a freshly dug grave ready to receive Thomas Ellis. "We'll need to be quick," the pastor said, glancing nervously toward town. "Word travels fast in Silver Creek." The burial was simpler than Abigail would have wished for her brother, but no less meaningful for its brevity. Pastor Miller spoke words of comfort and hope as four men lowered the coffin into the earth. Abigail placed a single wildflower on the coffin before the first shovelful of dirt fell. "I promise you justice, Thomas," she whispered, "and I promise to make our dream come true." As the men filled the grave, Lucas kept watch, alert to any approach. They were just finishing when he spotted riders entering town from the north, at least 6 men, moving with purpose. "We need to leave," he warned. "Now." They mounted quickly, Cooper and Jenkins heading west while Lucas and Abigail turned south, toward Denver. They rode hard, pushing their horses to a gallop once they cleared the town, not slowing until they reached the cover of a pine forest several miles away. "You think they saw us?" Abigail asked, breathless as they finally slowed to rest the horses. Lucas shook his head. "Don't think so, but they'll figure out we were there once they talk to people in town. The pastor will try to stall them, but eventually, they'll know where we're headed. Denver's still 2 days' ride. We'll make it." Lucas checked his saddlebags, where he'd secured the evidence, his notes, photographs, and the bullet he'd extracted from the mine wall, matching the caliber of Frank Blackwell's distinctive silver-plated revolver. "Once we reach the territorial governor, the Blackwells' days of ruling this county are over." They continued south, avoiding settlements and keeping to less traveled paths. As night fell, they made camp in a secluded ravine, building only the smallest of fires to cook a meager meal of beans and hardtack. "We should reach Denver by nightfall tomorrow if we push hard," Lucas said, studying his map in the firelight. "Governor Evans is a fair man. Once he sees our evidence, he'll send territorial marshals to arrest the Blackwells." Abigail stared into the flames. And then what? Will that bring Thomas back? No, Lucas admitted softly. Nothing can do that. But it will prevent others from suffering the same fate. Your brother's courage will have meant something. I know. Abigail looked up at him. I just miss him so much already. He was all the family I had left. Lucas hesitated, then reached across to take her hand. Not all, he said quietly. You have friends now. Martha, Jenkins, me. The simple touch of his hand was comforting, grounding. In the few days they'd known each other, Lucas Zimmerman had become someone she trusted implicitly, a rare thing in her experience. Thank you, she whispered. Their moment of connection was interrupted by a distant sound, horses approaching. Lucas was on his feet instantly, kicking dirt over their small fire. Pack up, quickly, he ordered, checking his weapons. They were mounted and moving within minutes, riding without light through the dangerous terrain. Behind them, voices called out as their abandoned campsite was discovered. Shots rang out, bullets whistling harmlessly through the trees as they fled into the darkness. The night became a harrowing game of cat and mouse. Lucas's knowledge of the territory proved invaluable as he led them through ravines and across shallow streams, doubling back occasionally to confuse their trail. By dawn, they had lost their pursuers, but had also lost valuable time, having been forced to circle wide to the east. We need fresh horses if we're going to reach Denver by tonight, Lucas said, as they paused to water their exhausted mounts at a small creek. Where would we get them? We can't risk a town or ranch. Lucas pointed to a plume of smoke rising in the distance. Stage depot, 10 miles south. They'll have horses, and they won't ask questions if I show my badge. The stage depot was a welcome sight after their night of hard riding. A simple wooden building with a corral and water trough. It served as a changing station for the coaches that ran between Silver Creek and Denver. The station master, a grizzled old man named Harley, recognized the marshal's badge immediately. What brings you out this way, Marshal? He asked, eyeing Abigail curiously. Official business in Denver. Need fresh mounts. Got 3 good horses? Rest her out with the morning stage. Harley scratched his beard. Trouble brewing? Nothing for you to worry about, Lucas assured him. But if anyone comes asking about us? Never saw you. Harley nodded understandingly. Folk around here are tired of the Blackwells throwing their weight around. Word is, they killed Thomas Ellis in cold blood last week. Abigail tensed but remained silent as Lucas completed the transaction. Within 20 minutes, they were on fresh horses, their path now taking them directly toward Denver. They rode steadily through the day, stopping only briefly to rest the horses and eat jerky from Lucas's supplies. By late afternoon, the terrain began to change, the foothills gradually giving way to the plains that surrounded Denver. We're making good time, Lucas observed as they crested a ridge that offered a view of the distant city. Another 3 hours, and we'll be there. But as they started down the slope, a shot rang out. Lucas's horse reared in panic, nearly unseating him. 3 riders emerged from a cluster of rocks to their right, Blackwell men who had somehow guessed their route and gotten ahead of them. Into the trees! Lucas shouted, drawing his revolver and returning fire as they galloped toward the forest edge. They made it to cover, but not before one of the bullets found Lucas's arm, tearing through his sleeve and leaving a bloody furrow in his flesh. They dismounted hastily, seeking protection behind the massive trunks of old-growth pines. You're hit, Abigail said, reaching for the wound. Just a graze. I'm fine. Lucas checked his ammunition. But we're pinned down again. The Blackwell men had taken positions behind rocks, effectively cutting off their route to Denver. Occasional shots kept them pinned in place as the afternoon waned. They're stalling, Lucas realized, waiting for reinforcements. What do we do? Lucas studied their surroundings. There's a ravine about 50 yards to our left. If we can reach it, it might lead us around their position. They'll see us the moment we break cover. Not if one of us creates a distraction. Lucas began reloading his revolver. I'll draw their fire, you take the evidence and make for the ravine. No. Abigail grabbed his arm. We go together or not at all. Lucas looked at her, surprise giving way to respect. All right. New plan. We'll create a diversion, then both make a run for it. Using the last of their matches, they set fire to the dry underbrush at the far edge of their position. As smoke began to billow, drawing the attention and fire of the Blackwell men, Lucas and Abigail made their desperate dash toward the ravine. Bullets kicked up dirt around their feet as they ran, but the smoke provided just enough cover for them to reach the edge of the ravine and slide down its steep side. They landed hard at the bottom, immediately pressing themselves against the wall as shots continued overhead. The ravine provided a natural corridor leading away from their pursuers. They followed it at a run, their horses lost but their determination intact. The evidence was secure in Lucas's satchel, and Denver lay somewhere ahead. As night fell, they emerged from the ravine onto the plains, the lights of Denver visible but still distant. They would have to cover the remaining miles on foot, through open terrain where they would be exposed. We'll wait for full dark, Lucas decided, checking his wounded arm. The bleeding had stopped, but pain lined his face. Abigail tore a strip from her petticoat to create a proper bandage. Let me see that arm. As she dressed his wound, their faces were close, their breath mingling in the cool evening air. Despite their desperate situation, despite the grief still raw in her heart, Abigail found herself drawn to this man who had risked everything to help her brother and her. Why did you really come back for Thomas? She asked softly. You could have continued your investigation without risking yourself for a proper burial. Lucas was quiet for a moment, his eyes on her hands as they finished tying the bandage. Because I know what it's like to not be able to bury your loved ones properly. To not have that closure. He looked up, meeting her gaze. My family, my wife and son, I never found their bodies after the raid. Never had a grave to visit. Understanding dawned. I'm so sorry, Lucas. It was 5 years ago. His voice roughened. Finding justice for them is what led me to the badge, and finding Thomas for you. It mattered. It was the right thing to do. In that moment, something shifted between them, a recognition of shared pain, of common purpose that went beyond their immediate circumstances. As full darkness descended, they began their final approach to Denver, staying low and moving carefully across the open ground. The city grew larger with each passing hour, its lights a beacon of hope. By midnight, they reached the outskirts, their exhaustion nearly overwhelming but their goal within reach. The territorial governor's mansion stood in the heart of the city, but at this hour, they knew they wouldn't be admitted. Instead, Lucas led them to a small hotel where he had stayed before. The owner is a friend, he explained as they approached the back entrance. He'll give us a room without questions and send word to the governor in the morning. The hotel owner, a burly man named Sullivan, was initially startled by their appearance dirty, bloodied, and exhausted, but recognition dawned when Lucas showed his badge. Trouble follows you like a shadow, Zimmerman, he grumbled, but he led them to a room on the second floor, brought hot water and clean towels, and promised to send a message to Governor Evans at first light. Left alone, Abigail and Lucas finally allowed themselves to acknowledge their exhaustion. They took turns washing away the grime of their journey, Lucas insisting Abigail use the bed while he took the chair. You need rest as much as I do, Abigail protested. The bed is large enough for both of us. Lucas hesitated, propriety warring with practicality. Are you certain? After everything we've been through, I think we're beyond such concerns. Abigail's voice held a hint of amusement despite her weariness. Besides, I trust you, Lucas Zimmerman. Those simple words seemed to touch him deeply. He nodded and carefully settled on the opposite side of the bed, maintaining a respectful distance. Within minutes, exhaustion claimed them both. Morning brought Sullivan with breakfast and news that Governor Evans would see them at 10 o'clock. They ate ravenously, the simple fare of eggs, bacon, and biscuits, tasting like a feast after days of trail rations. "What happens after we meet the governor?" Abigail asked as they prepared to leave. Sullivan had provided clean clothing for both of them, a simple dress for Abigail and a fresh shirt for Lucas. "If he accepts our evidence, he'll dispatch territorial marshals to arrest the Blackwells. There will be a trial, a fair one, not the farce they staged for Thomas." Lucas checked the contents of his satchel once more. "Justice will be done." "And then?" Lucas paused, seeming to understand she was asking about more than just the legal proceedings. "Then, I suppose I'll be assigned a new case. There's always work for a marshal." "Will you come back? To Silver Creek, I mean." Their eyes met, the question hanging between them laden with meaning neither was quite ready to voice. "I'd like to," Lucas said finally, "to see justice through, and to make sure you're settled safely back on your ranch." Abigail nodded, accepting this answer for now. There would be time later for other conversations, other possibilities. Governor Evans proved to be everything Lucas had described: fair-minded, direct, and deeply concerned about the lawlessness Lucas detailed. He examined the evidence carefully, questioning them both about what they had witnessed. "This is disturbing indeed, Marshal Zimmerman," he said finally, setting aside the photographs. "The Blackwells have powerful friends, but murder and theft on this scale cannot be tolerated." He turned to Abigail. "Miss Ellis, I am deeply sorry for your loss. Your brother sounds like a man of principle." "He was, sir," Abigail said quietly. "All he wanted was to build something honest in this new territory." A worthy aspiration. The governor rang for his secretary. "I'm dispatching 10 territorial marshals to Silver Creek immediately. The Blackwells will be arrested and brought to Denver for trial." He looked at Lucas. "I want you to lead the operation, Marshal. You know the territory and the players involved." "Yes, sir." Lucas straightened. "When do we leave?" "Tomorrow morning. Tonight you both rest. You've earned it." The governor stood, signaling the end of their meeting. "Miss Ellis, a room has been prepared for you at the Denver Hotel. You'll remain here as a protected witness until the arrests are made." "With all due respect, Governor, I'd prefer to return with Marshal Zimmerman," Abigail said firmly. "I have a ranch to see to, and I want to be present when the men who murdered my brother are brought to justice." Governor Evans studied her, seeming to reassess his initial impression. "You understand the danger?" "Better than most, sir. I've already faced it." "Very well." The governor nodded reluctantly. "But you'll stay with the marshal's party at all times." As they left the governor's mansion, Lucas looked at Abigail with newfound admiration. Most women would have accepted the safe option. "I'm not most women," Abigail replied simply, "and I made a promise to Thomas." The next morning, they departed Denver with 10 territorial marshals, experienced lawmen who had dealt with dangerous situations across the frontier. The return journey was swift and direct, the large force deterring any potential ambush by Blackwell men. They reached Silver Creek on the second day, establishing their headquarters at the town's small jail. Sheriff Parker was noticeably uncomfortable with the territorial marshal's presence, but offered no resistance when Lucas explained their purpose. "The Blackwells are at their ranch," the sheriff confirmed, "all 3 brothers and most of their men." Lucas laid out his plan to the assembled marshals. "We'll approach at dawn, surround the main house and bunkhouse. Victor and Edmund Blackwell are our primary targets, along with Frank. They're to be taken alive to stand trial." Abigail listened from the corner, her presence tolerated out of respect for her loss and her role as a witness. As the men discussed strategy, she noticed Lucas repeatedly touching the bandage on his arm, pain flickering across his face when he thought no one was watching. When the meeting concluded and the marshals dispersed to prepare, she approached him. "Your arm is worse." Lucas shook his head. "It's fine. You're a terrible liar, Marshal Zimmerman. Abigail reached for his sleeve. Let me see. Reluctantly, he allowed her to unwrap the bandage. The wound had become inflamed, angry red streaks extending from the bullet graze. This needs a doctor, she said firmly. After tomorrow. Now. Abigail's tone brooked no argument. You'll be no good to anyone if fever takes you during the raid. Lucas yielded to her insistence, and they sought out the town doctor, who cleaned and properly treated the wound, providing a dose of laudanum for the pain. By the time they returned to the jail, evening had fallen, and the marshals were preparing for an early night before the dawn raid. You should get some rest, too, Lucas told Abigail. Tomorrow will be difficult. I'll rest when the Blackwells are in custody. She sat beside him on the jail's narrow bench. Lucas, when this is over? He turned to her, his expression softening. Yes? Abigail hesitated, then found her courage. When this is over, I'd like you to stay. Not just to see to the ranch or make sure I'm settled, but to see if there might be something more between us. Lucas's eyes widened slightly, but he didn't pull away. Abigail, I've been a wandering lawman for 5 years. I'm not sure I remember how to stay in one place. Maybe it's time to learn. She took his hand. I'm not asking for promises. Just a chance to discover if what I feel, what I think we both feel, is real. For a long moment, Lucas was silent, his thumb gently tracing patterns on the back of her hand. I'd like that, he finally said. To stay. To see. Their quiet moment was interrupted by one of the marshals entering with news a Blackwell rider had been spotted leaving town at speed, likely carrying warning of their presence. We move now, Lucas decided, rising to his feet, before they have time to prepare or flee. The raid on the Blackwell ranch began under cover of darkness, the marshals approaching silently from multiple directions. Abigail remained with the wagon that would transport any prisoners, stationed safely behind a ridge overlooking the ranch. From her position, she could see the shadowy forms of the marshals surrounding the main house and bunkhouse. A signal lantern flashed 3 times the command to move in. What happened next unfolded with shocking speed. Shouts erupted from the main house, followed by gunfire. Lanterns were lit across the property as the Blackwell men awakened to the threat. The marshal's voice, Lucas's voice, called out through a speaking trumpet, demanding surrender in the name of territorial law. More gunfire answered. The night erupted into chaos, muzzle flashes illuminating the scene in brief, terrifying glimpses. Abigail clutched the edge of the wagon, her heart pounding as she tried to make sense of what was happening. A massive figure burst from the main house, gun blazing. Frank Blackwell, recognizable even at this distance by his size and distinctive hat. He cut down one marshal before others returned fire, dropping him where he stood. Abigail couldn't see Lucas in the confusion, couldn't tell if he was safe or if he'd been hit. The minutes stretched endlessly as the gunfire continued, then gradually slowed. Finally, as dawn began to break over the mountains, silence fell. Figures moved in the yard, marshals securing the property. 2 men were led from the main house in handcuffs, Victor and Edmund Blackwell, their empire crumbling around them. Abigail scanned the scene desperately for Lucas. Then, as the wagon driver urged the horses forward toward the ranch, she spotted him standing tall by the porch steps, giving orders to the other marshals. Alive. Whole. As the wagon rolled into the yard, Lucas looked up, his eyes finding hers. Relief washed over his face, matched by her own. They had done it. Thomas would have justice. The next few hours were a blur of activity. The surviving Blackwell men, including Victor and Edmund, were loaded into prison wagons for transport to Denver. Frank Blackwell's body was removed for burial. The marshals secured evidence from the main house ledgers and documents that confirmed everything Thomas had discovered and more. By midday, Lucas found a moment to join Abigail as she stood at the edge of the property, looking out over the valley. It's over, he said simply. Is it? Abigail asked. There will be a trial. Testimony. Yes, but the Blackwell's power is broken. Their men scattered or arrested. The evidence is overwhelming. Lucas touched her shoulder gently. Thomas's name will be cleared, his honor restored. Abigail nodded, feeling the weight of the past week finally beginning to lift. And the land they stole? The ranches they took? Governor Evans has promised a commission to investigate and restore property to its rightful owners. It will take time, but justice will be done there too. They stood in companionable silence for a moment, watching as the last of the prison wagons departed, carrying the Blackwell brothers to face their reckoning. I meant what I said last night, Abigail said finally, about you staying. Lucas turned to face her, reaching up to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear. The gesture was tender, intimate. I've requested a reassignment. Territorial Marshal stationed in Silver Creek County. Governor Evans approved it this morning. Joy bloomed in Abigail's chest. So you're staying? I'm staying. His fingers lingered against her cheek. To see justice done, to help rebuild what the Blackwells destroyed, and to discover if what's growing between us might become something more. In that moment, with the morning sun warming their faces and the promise of a new beginning before them, Abigail Ellis did what felt most natural. She stepped into Lucas Zimmerman's embrace. His arms encircled her, strong and secure, as their lips met in a kiss that spoke of shared pain, mutual respect, and the hope of love yet to bloom. Thomas's death would always be a wound in Abigail's heart, but as Lucas held her, she felt the first genuine healing begin. Her brother had dreamed of building something meaningful in this wild territory. In his memory, she would do just that, not just a ranch, but a life, a future. And the man who had sworn to bring back her brother's honor would be by her side, writing that future with her, day by day. 3 months later, the aspens had turned golden across the foothills as Abigail stood on the porch of the Ellis Ranch house, watching Lucas approach on horseback. The trial of the Blackwell brothers had concluded the week before in Denver, with both men sentenced to hang for Thomas's murder and numerous other crimes. The ranch was thriving under their joint care. Lucas had moved into the small cabin near the main house, respecting propriety while remaining close. Their relationship had deepened gradually, built on mutual respect and shared purpose that had blossomed into love. Good news from town, Lucas called as he dismounted. Governor Evans's commission has officially restored all the stolen properties. Martha Johnson gets her north pasture back, and the Wilson family can return to their homestead. Abigail smiled, watching as he tied his horse to the hitching post. That is good news. Thomas would be pleased. Lucas climbed the porch steps, removing his hat as he approached her. After 3 months as Silver Creek's territorial marshal, he had brought a new sense of justice to the county, earning respect from the community that had lived too long under the Blackwell's shadow. I visited Thomas's grave today, he said quietly, left some of those wildflowers he was so fond of collecting. Abigail's heart warmed at this simple act of remembrance. Thank you. Lucas took her hands in his. I've been thinking, Abigail, about the future, about us. Have you now? She teased gently, though her pulse quickened. I have. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet pouch. I'm not a man of many words or grand gestures, but I love you. I want to build a life with you, here on this land that meant so much to Thomas. He opened the pouch, revealing a simple gold band. Will you marry me, Abigail Ellis? Tears welled in Abigail's eyes as she nodded. Yes, Lucas Zimmerman, yes, I will. As he slipped the ring onto her finger and pulled her close for a kiss, Abigail felt a sense of rightness, of completion. From the depths of tragedy had come unexpected joy. From a promise to restore her brother's honor had come a love that would sustain them through whatever challenges the frontier might bring. That evening, as they sat together on the porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of pink and gold, Abigail rested her head on Lucas's shoulder, his arms secure around her waist. "I think Thomas would approve," she said softly. "Of us. Of everything we've accomplished." "I believe he would." Lucas pressed a kiss to her temple. "And I promise you this, Abigail. I will honor his memory in how I love you, in how we build this ranch, in every day we have together." As darkness fell and stars emerged to blanket the vast western sky, Abigail Ellis knew that while the path had been marked by loss and struggle, it had led her exactly where she was meant to be, beside a man who had restored her brother's honor and, in doing so, had given her heart a home.